Welcome to this 3-part mini-series where we'll be fully factually finding out if uranium, plutonium and Ficsonium fuel rods are ideal to produce. We'll be scoring all 3 fuel rods on a scale from 1 to 10 based on resource consumption, power required and, most importantly, how easy or fun is it to logistically set up. I've broken down and analysed every aspect of these 3 recipes to answer the question, are fuel rods worth it in Satisfactory? Today's video is all about the Ficsonium fuel rods, which combined absolutely everything here. However, in episode 1 we talked about the uranium fuel rods, whereas in episode 2 we talked about the plutonium fuel rods. Both of these 2 recipes are vital to make our Ficsonium fuel rods, except to make our Ficsonium fuel rods we also need a bunch of extra materials, not just what we've already talked about in the previous 2 videos. So this is what we'll be spending most of our time talking about today. However, do bear in mind we still need all the raw resources that are used to make our uranium fuel rods, which of course also consists of the power consumption and machines required as well. This will all be explained towards the end of the video. To make our 20 Ficsonium fuel rods per minute with a byproduct of 400 dark matter residue, we are going to need 40 Ficsonium, 40 electromagnetic control rods, as well as 800 Ficsite trigons and 400 excitophotonic matter. This is where we are going to start off with, since the 400 excitophotonic matter is the simplest thing to make here. This is about to be the quickest tutorial in the history of YouTube, but this is how you make excitophotonic matter. Go to your converter, go to the road to the very top, type in excitophotonic matter, press that button, and there you go. You're now making excitophotonic matter. It's super simple to do, and luckily one converter can indeed produce your 400 excitophotonic matter, so you only are going to need 1 of these, or 2 if you don't want to overclock one. So yeah, very simple to do. Next up we've got our 800 Ficsite trigons, and the only way you can make these is with Ficsite ingots, except there's 3 different recipes for this. I personally have chosen the Caterium because I've already done the pre-calculations. I've got a bunch of Caterium left over in my world. It's super easy to produce and I'm rather happy with making this. But if you would like to use the other 2 options, i.e. the aluminium or the iron, then feel free to do that. However, no matter what option you choose, you are also going to need SAM. Here's the difference. To make 10 Ficsite iron ingots, you need 40 reanimated SAM and 240 iron ingots. To make 10 Ficsite Caterium ingots, you're going to need 30 reanimated SAM and 40 Caterium ingots, whereas the Ficsite aluminium ingot, you only need 20 reanimated SAM and 40 aluminium ingots. So the more complicated the ingot is to produce, the less of it you need, and the less reanimated SAM you're also going to need. Furthermore, you can produce 75 of the Ficsite ingots in one converter when you're making it from the aluminium, whereas with iron, it's only 25, which ends up meaning that you are going to need a lot more converters, which consume a ton of power, so there's lots of differences there. I do cover all of this on a separate video I've already made talking about Ficsite. The third item that you're going to need is the 40 electromagnetic control rods, and I've spent a long time talking about these on the last couple of videos, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it today, but I do still want to highlight why I've chosen these recipes. First of all, I've used something called an iron stator recipe, which is just stators with iron pipes and iron wire. I love this recipe, it's super simple to do. You don't have to get water involved if you don't want to, but I do because I don't want to consume as much iron. It's very simple. When it comes to the AI limiters, we are using something called wet sheets and pure copper ingots, meaning that I get water involved with both stages, but luckily, it's again very simple to do and you save a bunch of copper. For example, right here I'm consuming 80 copper, but if I didn't use any water, then our 200 copper sheets will cost us 400 copper ingots, which of course copper ore to copper ingots is a 1-to-1 ratio, so that would then mean that we have to consume 400 copper ore. And bear in mind, I'm only consuming 80 copper ore rather than 400, so yeah, I really do like this recipe. And then when it comes to the quick wire, I've done something which combines Caterium ingots with copper ingots, which yes, does end up meaning you are going to consume more copper, but you end up saving a bunch of Caterium. And in my opinion, Caterium is far more valuable than copper. So those are the first 3 recipes that you need to make our Ficsonium fuel rods, and so far this is really basic. Well, that's when the basic part of this recipe ends, because yeah, things start to get a lot more complicated. I mean, it just goes on and on. Moving on to our final item, the 40 Ficsonium. How exactly do you make this thing? Well, firstly, you need 800 dark matter as well as 40 plutonium waste, which you should be getting from your plutonium fuel rods, and 40 singularity cells. This takes up the bulk of this recipe, so to begin with, let's start off with our 800 dark matter residue, since this is nice and easy to talk about. Essentially, you produce dark matter residue automatically as a byproduct from everything in the quantum encoder, because essentially whenever you use excited-photonic matter, it's going to get converted into dark matter residue as long as it goes through the quantum encoder. For example, we are using 400 excited-photonic matter here, and we're then getting 400 dark matter residue as a byproduct from the Ficsonium. So in reality, you might not actually need any of this, since you could just reuse other parts of your recipes which are already producing your dark matter residue to then make your Ficsonium itself. But let's say you're not producing any dark matter residue, then this is what you might need. 400 reanimated SAM, which then consumes 1600 SAM. The second recipe is the plutonium waste, which is basically made from the plutonium fuel rods, and then to make the plutonium fuel rods, I recommend watching my previous video that I've made about this series, since it already answers all of those questions. Lastly, we need our 40 singularity cells, and these things are not fun to make. And here's the reason why. The first thing that we need is our 800 concrete. It's quite a lot, but it's concrete, it's not too bad. We then need 400 iron plates. Okay, one of the most basic things to make in the entirety of Satisfactory, not too bad either. We're then going to need 80 dark matter crystals. I mean, it's a bit of a pain in the rear side to do, but as long as you use this diamond recipe, which I very highly recommend because it consumes a decent amount of coal and an okay amount of raw quartz, but of course it ends up saving you thousands of coal per minute. I really like it. And then of course, again, dark matter residue. This isn't too bad either, until you get onto this thing. Yes, you are going to be making nuclear pasta to make Ficsonium fuel rods. This by itself consumes a ton of power, so it'll be rather interesting to see if this recipe is even worth making. But there's good news. To make our nuclear pasta, we only need two things. First of which is our copper powder. And to produce our 800 copper powder, we are going to need 4,800 copper ingots. If you didn't want to get liquid logistics involved, you are then going to need 4,800 copper ore. But because I've got 1,280 water being added, we then only need 1,820 copper, so you do end up saving a good amount of resources. And look how tiny this recipe is. Surely the other recipe for our nuclear pasta isn't that bad either. Well, you're wrong, because we're going to need this, and this, and that, and all of that, and all of that, and wow, goodness gracious, I feel a bit nauseous after that. But everything that you see here is used to make, where is it? There it is, our pressure conversion cubes. And we're only making 4 of these per minute. But as you can see, this is a pretty chunky recipe, so let's break it down into 2 different halves. Firstly, we've got our 4 fuse modular frames per minute, which is essentially everything that you see right here. And then we have our radio control units, which is everything here, and this is where we're going to be starting off. To make our 8 radio control units, I am consuming 96 quartz crystals using the pure quartz crystals recipe, I believe it's called. It's fantastic. Just put a bit of water and some raw quartz into your refinery. You save a bunch of raw quartz, it is pretty good. Second thing you need is 16 high-speed connectors, where again, we're using the exact same circuit board recipe, which is just our copper sheets and silica. We've also got the same quickwire recipe that I showed you a little bit earlier on, and I'm also using something called iron cable, which is essentially just iron wire made from iron ingots and iron ore. It's a very, very simple recipe, but you can always use copper if you so wish. Lastly, for our radio control units, I am also making 32 heat sinks. The only thing that might be a bit confusing is why exactly I've used petroleum coke. Long story short, I had a bunch of petroleum coke saved up from a previous build, so I then used it to make my aluminium sheets, and here we are. I still really enjoy this recipe. I do still recommend doing all of this because it ends up saving you a good amount of bauxite and it doesn't get any random pieces of silica involved, which personally I don't like to deal with. We also make 11 polymer resin as a byproduct, which is useless, but 112 water as a byproduct from the aluminium scrap, which isn't actually that useless. And that's our radio control unit. I understand we're not towards the end of the video just yet and things are already getting kind of confusing, because you need crude oil to make heavy oil residue, you need heavy oil residue to make petroleum coke, you need petroleum coke to make your aluminium scrap. You need aluminium scrap to make your aluminium ingots, which then make the alclad aluminium sheets, which then make your heat sinks, which then make your radio control units, which then make your nuclear pasta, which then make your singularity cells, which then make Ficsonium, which then make Ficsonium fuel rods. I understand this is a very, very complicated recipe, and I will mention this towards the end of the video because a lot of you might be thinking, is any of this actually worth it? And again, I will answer that towards the end of today's upload. Last, we now move on to our final recipe, the fused modular frames, for which we are going to need 4 of them per minute. Starting off with our 100 nitrogen gas, nice and simple. We then need 200 aluminium casing. I'm not going to go over aluminium again since I've already talked about it with the heat sinks, but feel free to use whatever recipe you want. I personally prefer this one. We are also going to need heavy modular frames, and I absolutely love this recipe. And because of the way I've laid everything out, I technically only need 2 resources or 3 resources if we're including water, and that is iron and limestone. Since concrete just requires limestone, steel pipes using the iron pipe recipe only requires iron, encased industrial beams only requires limestone and iron, as well as modular frames that only require iron, but again I've used water for everything here as well. So that's our recipe breakdown. Now let's analyze the resources required. What we're about to be looking at is 3 different boxes. This one's for uranium, this one's for our plutonium recipe, then this one's for the Ficsonium recipe. And like I was saying in the introduction of today's video, Ficsonium requires all of this, so we've also got a box over here that's essentially the total of everything here combined. This is now what I'm going to be going through. So water, we are going to need 27,500 water per minute. Wow, this is a crazy amount of water, but what can you do? Next up, you need sulfur at 632, it's not dreadful. Next, we've got limestone at 2,309 per minute, which again is not great. Uranium coming in at 734, which is actually really good to be fair. There's like 2,100 available in your world, plus you can make a bunch more using your converter. Next up, we then got 2,219 iron ore, with 2,660 copper ore. Neither of these is that bad considering you are making 20 Ficsonium fuel rods, 4 plutonium fuel rods, and 8 uranium fuel rods, so it sounds like a lot, but realistically it's not that bad. You're then going to need 668 deuterium, it's okay. 580 nitrogen gas, it's not a monumental amount, but it's not an unnoticeable amount either, so do be cautious about that. You're also going to need 768 coal, and most of that is thanks to our dark matter crystal recipe. You're also going to need 63.5 crude oil, which is basically nothing, that's a really good amount. 622 bauxite, it is what it is. 642 raw quartz, that's okay. This is also rather concerning, 2,320 SAM. This is roughly, I think, a quarter of all the SAM available in your playthrough, so it is quite a lot. And we're also going to need 400 excited matter, which is not a problem. The only thing this is going to cost you is essentially electricity or power, so that's not dreadful. Overall, the resource consumption is not great. It could be worse, but this by itself is dreadful, and everything else is just fine after that. This is where things start to go from bad to absolutely dreadful, as we're about to see. Again, we've got the uranium, plutonium, Ficsonium recipes, combine them all together to give us our overall machine consumption and power consumption. Starting with our 8 quantum encoders consuming an average of 8,000 megawatts to a maximum of 16,000 megawatts, which is mental. We're going to need 22 particle accelerators consuming an average of 17,350 megawatts and a maximum of, get this, 25,950 megawatts. But just the particle accelerators, nothing else, just the particle accelerators. That's mind-blowing. Next up, we've got the converters, where we're going to need 39 of them, consuming an average of 9,500 megawatts to a maximum of 15,200. Again, this is a very silly number, but it's facts. It is what it is. This is what you have to consume. Moving on to some more, well, I say realistic, it's still outrageous numbers. We need 52 manufacturers consuming 2,707 megawatts, 34 blenders consuming 2,515 megawatts, 372 refineries consuming 10,566 megawatts. Bear in mind, at least 120 of your refineries are actually making your copper ingots for your copper powder for your nuclear pasta, so that's where that number's essentially come from. We then need 193 assemblers consuming 2,797 megawatts. Wow. You then need 6 foundries consuming, just 78 megawatts. That's a nice low number at least. 22 smelters consuming 111 megawatts, 180 constructors consuming 739 megawatts, and then here's a pretty heavy hitter, 231 water extractors consuming 4,604 megawatts. So in total, to make your Ficsonium fuel rods, again, to make all 20 of them, you are going to need 81,000 megawatts, which is roughly 4,000 megawatts for one Ficsonium fuel rod, which seems mental in my mind. This is the moment we have all been waiting for since about 5 days ago when I published the first episode of this series. Is Ficsonium fuel rods actually worth it in Satisfactory? Well, here we go. Our uranium has a 6 to 100% ratio, which essentially means that for every 100 megawatts you are producing, you need 6 megawatts to power the uranium factory. To make our plutonium, it's 13 out of 100, which is quite a bit worse than our uranium. But have a look at this. This is ridiculous. For every 100 megawatts you are producing in your Ficsonium factory, just Ficsonium, you need 124 megawatts to power it. Again, I'll say that again. For every 100 megawatts you are making, you need 124 megawatts to power it. You are losing power making this recipe. You are literally losing roughly 12,240 megawatts here, which is ludicrous. But of course, by the time that you've actually made all of this together, these are our final results. We are making 250,000 megawatts worth of power, but we're actually using 81,267,000 megawatts. So in total, thanks to the uranium and plutonium, we've actually still got a net power gain of 168,733 megawatts, which is not dreadful. It means that roughly for every 100 megawatts of power you are producing in your Ficsonium factory, you are going to be spending roughly a third of that on your actual factory itself. Which means that if you are making 100,000 megawatts in your entire Ficsonium factory, you're actually only producing or getting out of it 66,000, so it's really not that good. So regarding resource consumption for Ficsonium, is it worth it? Well, it consumes an absolute ton of water, which I don't necessarily like that much. It consumes a decent amount of uranium and a bunch of other resources, so I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It's not dreadful, but it's not great either. Regarding power required, I mean, it's dreadful. You're literally losing power with the Ficsonium part of your Ficsonium fuel rod, so I have to give it a 0. There is absolutely no point in trying to make this thing for your power when you're losing power whilst making it. So again, 0 is completely justified. And logistic setup, do you seriously want to place down 350 refineries or 260 something water extractors, as well as the hundreds of other machines and all the quantum encoders and the particle accelerators and the converters, and have to deal with all that? I don't think so. Don't get me wrong, I do obviously like Satisfactory and those elements of Satisfactory, but knowing that you're doing all of that when you're losing power, in my mind, is completely useless. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. Meaning that Ficsonium scores an average, or a total should I say, of 8 out of 30, and I really do not recommend it in comparison to uranium and plutonium. So why on earth would you want to make this? Well, firstly, Ficsonium is actually relatively new into the game. It's the newest fuel rod. A lot of people might want to see what it's like, they might want to experience it, and there you go. If you'd like to do it, you can. The second reason, which I think most people choose, is that it actually consumes all the uranium and plutonium waste and then converts it into a fuel rod at the cost of, as we can see down here again, quite a lot of power. Other than that, personally, I do not recommend you make the Ficsonium fuel rod, but if you've made it or if you are choosing to make it, do comment down below. Do you guys recommend the Ficsonium fuel rod? Because for me personally, it's a very simple answer: no. Without further ado, thank you very much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.